In this tutorial, I'll show you how I color and render using Procreate. I'll be covering my drawing process steps, layer structures, the brushes I use, tips and tricks, and finally my rendering process from start to finish. So let's get started. I'll start first by breaking down my process into 5 steps: sketching, block color, main colors, adding details, lighting and shadings, and finally rendering and final adjustments. First, let me explain simply what I do in each step using this example. As I mentioned, there are 5 steps in my rendering process. First, I draw the sketch just like this, and I prefer to use the gray color. Then I fill the shape with the base color, and I prefer to use this tone of colors. Then I add shadows and highlights using the lighter shade for highlighting and the darker shade for shading. And I use different modes to enhance the lighting. I usually keep each step on a separate layer. For highlights, I create a new layer, turn on clipping mask and set it to add mode or screen mode. For shading, I use multiply mode. This way I can adjust each part without affecting the others. After adding highlights and shadows, I draw extra details on another layer and finish by adjusting the colors, lighting, and shading with the adjustment tool. And that's it. It looks complicated if you look to the final drawing, but it is not if we break it down into a few different steps. I usually work with about 15 to 20 layers in my drawings. I like to split them up, some for the background, some for the main characters, and the rest for things like highlights, shadings, and adjustments. In this drawing, I used 4 layers for the background, 1 for the base color, 1 for the shading, 1 for highlights, and 1 for details. For the main characters, I used 8 layers, 2 for the characters themselves, and the rest for textures, shadows, and highlights. For the final touches, I used 3 adjustment layers for the whole drawing, and underneath them are the main sketch layers, plus the main shading and highlighting layers. So when it comes to brushes, I prefer always to use my sleek ink brush for sketching and adding details, my flat brush for coloring, the grainy texture brush for shading, highlighting, and adding texture, and finally my freckles brush for adding extra details. Another options that you can use by choosing appropriate default brushes are 6B pencil for sketching, hard A brush for coloring, soft brush for shading and highlighting, and finally soft pastel for adding texture. So after drawing the main sketch using my sleek ink brush and the gray color, I open a new layer above the main sketch layer and I start refining the sketch line by using the sleek ink brush and the brown color to draw clean and clear lines. I prefer to keep the sketch lines because I like my drawings to stay clear and well defined. And this is optional. You can keep it or you can clean it after adding the main colors. It's up to you, but for me, I prefer to keep it. Now I create a layer underneath the main sketch layer and I start adding the block color. For this step, I'm using my flat brush for coloring and I prefer to use the beige tone for this step. After finishing that, I start to add layers above this main color and I turning on clipping mask and I start adding the colors to my drawing. I add each color on a separate layer. For example, the main characters, I color them on a separate layer, the background on a separate layer. That way makes it easier for me to adjust or to add details or even to remove details without affecting the other layers. Now I start adding texture to my drawing, and for this step I use two techniques. The first one is to use alpha lock to add texture to my drawing, or I create a layer above, for example, this character, and turning on clipping mask, and I start adding texture. For this step I use my grainy texture brush to add details. Now I'm adding extra details for the background, like flowers and leaves. I'm still adding texture to my drawing by using the grainy texture brush, and I use the 𝚁𝚊𝚌𝚑𝚎𝚕 brush also to do this. I prefer also to use the freckles brush to add those cute dots to my drawing. And for this step, I'm using my chalky texture brush to add this cute texture to my drawing. And as you see, now I'm adding highlights to the character. For this step I created a new layer above the character and set the layer to screen mode, and I'm using the light yellow to add texture using my sleek ink brush, which I prefer to use for adding highlights and shadow for my drawing. In this step, I duplicate the highlights color and I lower the opacity to keep the lights natural. After finishing this step, I create a new layer above my character, turning on clipping mask, and I set the layer to multiply mode, and I start adding shadows to my drawing using the purple color and my grainy texture brush. Here I'm adding extra details to my drawing using my chalky texture brush. And to finish my drawing, I go to adjustment tool and I start adjusting the lights, colors and shadows, and that's it. Hope that was useful. If you have any questions or recommendations, please leave them in the comments below. See you on the next video. Bye bye.